Today on Freedom Alive, teachers and students are rejecting critical race theory and instead building self-esteem by teaching true American history. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Racism is learned. No child is born a racist, yet the subject of critical race theory is being pushed into our schools today. It's not only wrong and untruthful, but it's harmful indoctrination. Nancy Randolph is an upper school teacher at Victory Christian Academy in Orlando. She joins us today to share the creative ways she teaches students the truth about how American history and the Bible are intertwined. I'm joined again today by co-host Matt Staver. Matt, I'm excited today that we're going to experience history right before our eyes through some amazing students. Nancy Randolph uses an American History Alive museum to showcase God's hand throughout history. That means students learn the true American history experience, as well as those like us who also get to participate.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see what Nancy is doing with some of these young people, and not only training them how to perform, but also about our American history, and then educating people that actually are able to watch this. And I think anyone who watches this, in fact, I watched here in the studio as they were performing, and I was amazed at one of them. I didn't know the information before about the architect of the Capitol. I didn't know some of those details. So it's an incredible insight into our history, a lot of history that is no longer taught in American public education.
For those at home, I think you're going to learn many things today. I have. But first is our Freedom Alert is next.
It's a huge win for counselors and their clients. I'm Matt Staver, co-host of Freedom Alive. In 2020, a three-judge panel of an appeals court struck down laws in Palm Beach County and the city of Boca Raton that banned counselors from providing help to minor clients who struggle with unwanted same-sex attractions, behaviors, or gender confusion. Then the city and county tried to have that ruling overturned, but the court denied a request for the entire panel of judges to reconsider the previous decision. Now, these licensed therapists who provide life-saving counseling can continue to help their clients. Liberty Counsel represents Dr. Robert Otto and Julie Hamilton and their minor clients who challenge the unconstitutional bans. This is a great victory for counselors and their clients to be free of political censorship from the government.
Up next, Matt's interview with Nancy Randolph.
I'm excited about our special guest, Nancy Randolph. She has taught grades 7 through 12 for 16 years at the Victory Christian Academy in Orlando. And Nancy, you have a very keen interest in American history and also training the next generation. And when you do that, you impact generations when you train young people. So tell us about how you got involved in your interest in American history, and then you launched this American History Alive museum experience where you have these young people literally come to life and talk about American history. That is incredibly fascinating.
Well, I started teaching 7th grade, and teaching 7th grade at Victory Christian Academy taught everything. And before then, I homeschooled. But as I got more into really reading about American history, I found things that was taught different, the way the belief was. I believe for so long, I was on the other side, thinking hatred of America, you know, the negative. But the more I researched, it was just so different. And so I wanted to let the students know. And I would teach them, and I love the school that I teach at. You can teach truth. And just how Christian is so intertwined in American history. And I love teaching the students.
It's like one of the stories that you have with one of your students that actually reenacts Justice Clarence Thomas, the United States Supreme Court Justice, and he came up in an environment where he was filled with hate, racial hatred.
Yes.
And that went away as he learned more, but as he deepened his walk with Jesus Christ as well. Yes. And it sounds like that's something similar to you, that you actually had a different view of America,
exactly.
A more racist kind of view of America.
Exactly.
My name is Justice Clarence Thomas. I was born in Pinpoint, Georgia. About 2 years after I was born, our father had deserted the family. Soon after, we went on to live with our grandfather, my brother and I, and from there, he taught us many hardworking principles. A saying that he had was, "Old man Kant is dead, and I helped bury him." What he input and instilled in us was that no matter what, as long as we work hard, we can achieve anything. I attended Roman Catholic primary school, and then I also attended seminary school soon after and graduated as the first or the only African American in my class. In the spring of 1968, Martin Luther King had just been assassinated, and I began to fall into racial politics. It could be a good thing, but it could also be a bad thing, and for me, it was a very bad thing. And so I went back home with so much hatred and anger in my heart. And my grandfather told me that with the beliefs and where I was standing, I couldn't stay here no longer. So at the age of 19, I packed up my stuff and headed out to college. I attended Immaculate Conception Abbey my freshman year, and then I transferred over to Holy Cross Communion. And then I remember in 1970, I also went to a riot, a Black Panther riot. And I remember coming back, heading back over to chapel at the Holy Communion Cross College and feeling so guilty and disgusted with myself. I asked God if he could take this hatred out from me, if he could remove this from my heart, that I would never do such a thing ever again. And so over time, I began to get better and better. And so I began to think and ponder, what are my next steps? And like a thunderbolt, it hit me. I should help people. And so I attended Yale in 1971 and graduated around 1974. And from there, I was able to work in a law firm, and I was soon appointed to replace Justice Thurgood Marshall as a Supreme Court Justice. And then from there, I get a lot of backlash and hatred from my conservative beliefs, but only because I know that I am my grandfather's son.
It's an amazing transition when you begin to actually read American history. David Barton has a lot on America in black and white, and it's incredible about all of the multiracial black and white Americans and others that came together to be part of this incredible country. Exactly. What was the most fascinating thing that you have learned in your studies and your pursuit of this idea of the true American history?
Well, one of the things, you know, you're taught that America was built on the backs of the slaves, or they started with slavery. And that's not true. In 1607 to 1619, there was not one person that was looking for or searching out slaves. They were brought over here by a pirated ship, and then, you know, the swap happened, but it wasn't something they started. And with those ships in 1607, 1620, and 1630, coming from a nation in England where there was thriving slavery, there was no slave on those ships. It didn't start that way.
What many people don't know is that many of the founders that signed the Constitution and or the Declaration of Independence were part of the abolition movement, that they wanted to abolish slavery. And the very words of the Declaration of Independence, that we are created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that forms the foundation for the liberation of everyone.
Yes, and the very fact that in 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, there was not one black person on Congress. There was not one black legislator. In 1865, when the 14th Amendment, 13th Amendment was signed, or the 14th Amendment, or the 15th Amendment, when all these amendments that came about for black people, it was all white people doing this.
You know, with regards to politics, it is a foreign idea that it was the Republican Party that actually was brought into existence, Abraham Lincoln and others, because of the abolition of slavery. And it was the Democratic Party that was oppressing blacks, wanting to keep them out of elected office and wanting to keep them in separate drinking fountains and separate restrooms. Exactly. That is where the Jim Crow laws came from, is the Democratic policies.
The KKK were the the strong arm for the Democrat Party.
You know, the fact is when you really look at the true American history, it's frankly startling, and it's really liberating, because the principles that founded America, and I'm sure you see this and you certainly teach it, really are the principles of freedom and equality for all these races.
Exactly.
But what we see happening today, it seems as though in the critical race theory, I want you to talk about that. What do you see happening with the schools and the young people with regards to critical race theory, the result of which is to divide people and make them divide based upon race?
One of the things that they teach in schools is that, for instance, a person is inherently racist. That can be farther from the truth. They see little young kids thinking that white kids thinking that they're racist because they're white. Racism was going on thousands of years before America was even America. A lot of kids don't know that the Barbary Pirates, those were northern African nations that enslaved white Christians in Europe. And that went on from the 1300s to the 1600s. I mean, slavery was even in the Native Americans was slaves. You know, enslaving other Native Americans. It's been going on for years.
Unfortunately, slavery has been going on for thousands of years. Long before America was even a concept.
Exactly.
You know, back in the ancient Middle East, slavery was in place. It's still unfortunately going on around the world.
Yes.
And when we look at America and we look at what happened with William Wilberforce, he dedicated his life to the abolition of slavery, and he ultimately was able to live to see that day. America also abolished slavery, and instead of going back and trying to repaint every American, particularly white American, or their history as racist, we need to celebrate and become unified, because we're all created in the image of God. Racism, critical racism particularly, divides people, and I think that's really what the agenda is of critical race.
And every white person in America was not a slave owner. You know, and there were also blacks that owned slaves. Like the first legal, there were already people that were black people that were being kept in slavery, but the first legal slave owner of a permanent black slave was a black man, Anthony Johnson. And it was John Kaser who was the slave.
What's some of the things that you have encountered with your students as you started teaching them this? Because I'm sure they have come from all different kinds of educational backgrounds as they come to your school. It's a Christian school, but people have different environments.
Exactly.
What's the kind of response that you get when you first start teaching the truth about American history?
It blows their minds. It really does. And because there are students who are taught certain things, or things they get from the media and what have you, and when they learn, what I first do is they have to research a person. And then I send out researches, paperwork, they find about the people. And then when they see this for themselves, and they read about it for themselves, it blows their mind. And also to see the triumphs, because like with critical race theory, it also makes young black kids think they're victims and they can't overcome.
So speak to the teachers that might be watching, because there's a lot of teachers that are in public school, Christian school, private school. How would you broach this subject, and what do you do when you get somebody who pushes back against you? Perhaps even a student who wants to file a complaint about what you're doing. How would you approach this issue with a student who is not accepting because they've never heard this, until you actually are able to take them through true history?
One of the things that I do, and that's so important to do, is to let the students find out the research for themselves. Because when they read it, and when they can see it for themselves, and it's not just me teaching it to them, sometimes a student will ask me a question about certain things, even when they asked me about some of the things that was going on recently. And I said, you research it, as far as the disparity of blacks and whites, for instance, financially. I said, do the research. When I did the research was totally different, to show that it wasn't, it was the choices. It had nothing to do with anything that was systematically put in that way for blacks to earn less. It's choices on what you choose to go to school, or you leave school and quit school, things like that. And so that when students research it for themselves and see the fact, then that helps them a lot. And then I can communicate to them.
So let's actually experience some of the actual presentations of the American History Alive Museum experience.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Banneker. I was born in the year 1731 in Maryland. I am noted as America's first African-American scientist. My main fields of study are agriculture, astronomy, and surveying. One of my feats in surveying was when the United States Capitol was being built, I was a part of the design team assigned by Washington to build the Capitol. And when a year's worth of work was stolen from us by a disgruntled designer, I, from memory, recreated the entire design of the United States Capitol within 2 days. I did not miss a single jot or street. I also successfully predicted the lunar eclipses of my time. And I had a hobby as well, clockmaking. And one thing, I created a clock, a grandfather clock that chimed true for 70 years.
My name is Susan B. Anthony, and I devoted my life to fighting for women's rights. I was born in 1820 in Adams, Massachusetts, and I was raised in a Quaker family, so I knew from a young age that God created everyone equal. Alongside my family, I became an activist, especially for the abolition of slavery. But when I was prohibited from speaking at a conference solely because I was not a man, I knew I must also take a stand for women's rights, specifically suffrage, or the right to vote. I co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Association, and I worked with fellow activists to put out a number of written works on why women's rights should include suffrage. I even went on to illegally cast my vote in the 1872 presidential election. I was arrested and fined, but I stood my ground, and through all of that, God gave me a platform to make my fight better known to the public. Although I never lived to see it, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920 and legalized women's suffrage. It was nicknamed the Susan B. Anthony Amendment in my honor because I paved the way for it to happen. But to God be all the glory.
In 1797, I was born Isabella Baumfree, but my real name is Sojourner Truth. My Lord Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Well, I entered this world a New York slave, but I left it an advocate of justice. I traveled this great nation, speaking out against the evils of slavery, standing up for women's rights, and telling all how they could be free in body and in spirit. I was born in Ulster County, New York, sold many times, brutally beaten, and raped repeatedly as a child. After years in the turmoil of slavery, I ran away with my infant daughter. It was 1826, 1 year before New York freed its slaves. Sometime later, the state of New York emancipated me, which meant I was now legally free in body, as I already was in spirit. When the Civil War came, I worked to recruit many Negro men for the Union Army. And in 1860, I sat with President Lincoln and talked with him for better conditions for my people. And he listened carefully to what I had to say. In 1870, I sat with President Grant, who was also Republican, and I helped him with his campaign. Over the years, there were many drawings and pictures taken of me, which made me quite well known and opened the door for me to speak out against the poor conditions of the Negro and the lack of rights for women. I never stopped using the platform and the voice that God gave me to speak the truth.
Most people have never heard today of Sojourner Truth, but Sojourner Truth is one of the characters that you have.
Yes, yes. I love putting in people that, because you know you have Martin Luther King Jr. and people like that, but there are people through history who triumph through the adversities that they went through. And that's the thing about American history, that doesn't matter about America, about the format of America, that how it was set up. It doesn't matter who you were and what you came from. Madam C.J. Walker was the first female millionaire, black or white.
Yeah.
It's so many through histories, and a lot of kids don't know. Black or white do not know the triumphs and the inventors and the scientists.
So she was the first female ever to become a millionaire,
first female,
and
period.
she was black.
Yes.
My name is Madam C.J. Walker. I was born on December 13, 1867. In 1905, I created cream to help heal my damaged scalp. This cream was a success. My hair grew longer than ever before. Other women saw the success and wanted to know what I used, so I began selling it to them. After the divorce of my third husband, I began to sell door-to-door hair products called Madam C.J. Walker Hair Culturist. My business expanded, and I was able to hire other colored people and teach them how to be successful. My business expanded all throughout the United States. In 1915, I was known as the first colored woman to be wealthy and the first female, white or black, millionaire in America. However, my success did not make me blind to see what was going on around me. I fought against the discrimination of my people and the lynching of colored men. I became known as an activist and an entrepreneur. I have learned that if you stick with what you believe in, you can make a difference. And don't wait for opportunities to come. Get up and make them.
There's so much richness in American history
Yes,
if you
there
take
is.
time to read it. And one of the things that is concerning is even Christian teachers that are teaching in Christian schools, they're used to the education that they receive, likely in a secular or public school. And one of the things that I think what you have done is you've challenged yourself to read additional information.
Yes.
Talk to the teachers about that and the parents, because there's lots of parents that homeschool. You homeschooled as well.
Yes.
How do they start thinking outside of the box rather than what they've just been taught? How do they start peeling back the layers of the onion to learn what you've been able to learn?
Well, one of the things I really did, first of all, because I am a Christian and I pray, and one of the things I'm like, Lord, show me truth to this, you know. But when I started researching and not just going by what you see on the media, I think most people get what they see on the media and just really believe it, or just the first book that comes along. Then I will research that to see, because I want to know factual evidence. David Barton is he's one of my go-to people.
Yeah.
But there are actually government documents that will prove. You want the source that proves that out. And and it's so much rich history and facts to things. And when you, even just as a student, it's like, wow. It will blow your mind when you research for yourself what's in that book to find where they got it from.
So how do parents get involved? How would they be able to get involved in, maybe as they're teaching their children at home, or maybe they're having their children go into private or public school? How can they learn more information? Is there a place to go, a resource to go? What's their steps that they can take, and teachers as well?
One of the places I do love to go to is wallbuilders.com with David Barton. There's several, and when you do a research on Black history, I will have this also, the Yoakum, American history. Francis Yoakum, and did an awesome book called 1619 to 2019, American history. It is the most perfect book I've found on Black history, because sometimes you have a textbook that'll have a lot of good things about American history, but a little bit about Black America. And you can't do that when it started in 1619.
Right.
But their book is awesome.
And that book again is?
It's American History from 1619 to 2019 by Francis Yoakum. And Rice and Yoakum are the two.
Rice and Yoakum are
the two authors.
And that's 1619 all the way to 2019.
To 2019.
And that
Awesome book.
includes all the real history.
Yes.
Including Black history.
Yes, it's
it
one of
doesn't
the-
just eliminate them.
Exactly. It's one of the first that I found that I really love.
You know, David Barton has a presentation that he does about American Black and White. You mentioned
Yes.
his website, Wall Builders
Yes.
website, incredible resources that he has. And he also talks about how some of the history books literally intentionally at a certain time, in fact, one of the past Democratic presidents, Woodrow Wilson, brought a KKK movie into the White House to debut it, and that kind of gave new existence to the KKK that was going down. But writing history books around that time intentionally eliminated Black history.
Under his
authority, because he's the one who wrote those history books.
Exactly.
And he was a racist, and he intentionally left Black Americans out of American history.
Right.
And that's what was taught in our schools.
And one of the things that it does, especially for, like I said earlier, with young Blacks, kids to think that you are inferior, or you can't do it, or you need a handout. And that's not the case. That's not the case of George Washington Carver. That wasn't the case of Booker T. Washington. Just give us the floor. And look what they did instead of, you know, the segregation and things that was going on, and came to be, these men thrive, these men and women in Black American history thrive through those adversities.
Well, Nancy, thank you for your dedication, for pouring your life into these young people. because once you change the life of a young people, that ripples through history. So your effort, your work is not only reaching this generation, but will reach many, many future generations as well. Our guest is Nancy Randolph, and incredible. I encourage you, I want to challenge you, if you're a teacher, maybe a homeschooler, or you're teaching in a public or private or Christian school, particularly a Christian school, to do what Nancy did. Obviously pray and seek the Lord for His guidance as she did, and her life was transformed. But also look at real history, look at the events, do your own research, because there is an incredible rich abundance there about how God brought this land to be. And do what you can in your sphere to bring people together rather than divide them based on race. In God's sight, we are all created equal. Thank you again for joining us on Freedom Alive.
Thank you for having me.
Matt, what a great interview. I am so thankful that God gave Nancy a heart to teach the truth. I thought it was remarkable. The other thing that I took away from your time with her, parents crying. We just don't know the facts, right? So the kids do this, parents are crying, coming up to her saying, I didn't know this, right? Our kids and our families are under attack.
They're really under attack, and you know, when you rewrite history, as is done now in our schools, and even more so now than it has been in the recent past, and certainly in the propaganda, it's done for an agenda, for an objective, and that is to slant history so that you think in a very different way from what true American history is. And clearly part of that is eliminating the founding principles of this country and also then instilling racism.
Spiritual warfare.
The truth will set you free.
For those of you at home, surround yourself and your family with the Word of God. In the Word of God it says, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That verse in John 8:32 specifically refers to how the gospel gives true freedom, but that can also be applied to knowing the truth about American history. When we know the facts about our nation's Judeo-Christian foundation, we can refute the harmful narrative that America is a racist country. Well, that's it for today. But be sure to tune in next week, where we'll update you on existing battles and alert you to new government overreaches. We'll tell you about the victories people of faith are winning and how you can fight back and stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.
My name is Dr. Carol Swain, and I'm a retired professor of political science. I am a Christian, an author of 10 books, and a lover of truth. I taught at Princeton and finally at Vanderbilt University. Although I experienced extreme poverty and was once super depressed and very suicidal, I went back to school, and here I am now through God. God helped me.